That's a hard one. So I actually did something. I went out with Mama Bear Clan one night, and because I didn't know my way. I've done a lot of street outreach work, but I wanted to go out and see how they interact. I was really impressed, and I spent some time out there. And one of the guys came up and recognized me, and he said, "What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm really totally honest. I'm kind of knocking on doors in a campaign." He said, "Well, no one's ever knocked on my door in a campaign before." I said, "Well, let's talk about that." And I said, so I asked him, would you like to live here? What are your living choices if you had them, and why do you think you don't have choices that you can make? But I was saying, should we not have some community kitchens? That can we not have community showers? If people want to live outside, why can't we get people proper tents and have an area where is like a camping ground, with perfect services and laundry? Because he said this is the big challenges. We live that. Why can't we have proper garbage pickup in these areas? Large stretches along Higgins as you go past into the industrial area, where people have been choosing to. Is something I really think we should look at. And then there's other problems. I mean, in some neighborhoods, and I mean like Point Douglas, I don't mean just like River Heights only. There are people there that are encamped, and some of the people point out that they're not there much of the year. These are people where there are some problems, where there have been where there's safety issues that have emerged, and you have to be able to be respectful if you live on Grove Street or something, that you can live in a neighborhood that's safe. So the coexistence of that. And also access to public lands. I mean, there are public parks and spaces in neighborhoods that people should have unfettered access to. So the organization of those spaces. But these aren't things that I think you start with some preconceived notion of what the outcome is going to be. I think that you have to understand how people are living, what choices they're making, why they're making the choices they want, how they feel safe, how they feel respected. Meth is a horrible thing because it crosses over all of those lines in two ways. Because on one hand, when you've got a meth addiction, cognitive skills and abilities are pretty limited. You can't actually make decisions for a long time. And some people will say, well, those people should also be able to do that. Other people will say, no, having them isolated for 2 or 3 months is kind of necessary because it takes that long before they're back in their bodies in a way that they can make decisions. And then we can bring them into social things. So meth is controversial. There's a lot of perspectives on it in the community, especially when it comes to Indigenous people because of colonialization and the robbing of choice. But I think we really, really have to focus very heavy on meth addiction right now, its consequences, and have a real discussion with people about ethics and choices. And how do you deal with that difficult question when someone is going to be self-destructive, when they're homeless, they're going to need a home. And what kinds of constraints may some people need on their lives? Because I worked with foster kids, I worked with addictive kids. And Michael told me when he got older, had he not had the restrictions that I put on him, that his parents wouldn't put on him, an accountability about being home, and literally telling him he couldn't go out, and literally having to lock a door sometimes, he said he probably would have never gotten anywhere into recovery. But so those are hard things to do. They're really hard to do. And again, I'm aware of the issue. I'm also aware of my own shortcomings in knowledge and understanding and experience with that. So my job as mayor is to try and bring people together and start those dialogues that can lead to solutions and be patient and supportive.
Suburbs, and then it started residing in our bus shelters. And these bus shelters should not be considered tiny homes, though we have to understand why. People do not like being in homeless shelters. People do not like sleeping next to someone they do not know. There's a lot of vulnerability when you close your eyes and you're sleeping to someone you do not know. You get very nervous. And so it's extremely important, I think, that we provide a wide range of options for people to get out of homelessness. A lot of it's related to mental health and addictions issues. Today we're actually announcing our addictions policy. One, it's not only about treatment, it's not only, which I think a lot of candidates have talked about, but there's a lot of issues surrounding making sure that there is harm reduction, that we have a secure consumption site, supervised consumption site with prescribed pharmaceuticals to make sure that people have options, that they don't have to go out and steal or commit petty crime or other forms of crime, violent crime sometimes, because they are unable to obtain a secure, safe pharmaceuticals from medical professionals. And then finally, just making sure that there are supports for people at 2 o'clock in the morning. When someone has an addiction issue or they're recovering, once you've recovered or you've left the recovery programs, that's when your recovery actually travel begins, because you're now in the community, and that's when all the triggers, all the things that could tempt you are out there in the community. And that's when people need the support the most. It's not during the 21-day program, which often aren't long enough for many people. It's actually when they get out. And so we have to make sure that it's not like they call and they get told, well, you can come down 9 to 5 and you can have an appointment in 2 weeks. They need someone there at 2 o'clock in the morning on the weekends if they need it, and to make sure that they have those supports.
What would your...
Well, we're not going to be, I think the bus shelters are there for people to be using, because we want to make sure transit is a good experience. People, they're supposed to be heated, and your grandmother can go in the bus shelter, pay her $1 for an affordable transit ride, which is part of our plan. It's safe. They get on the bus, and they go. So people will not be allowed to live in the bus transit shelters anymore. And obviously it's going to take, there's going to be a transition period, but we do have to find ways of providing housing for people as soon as possible. We cannot just simply say, well, you can't live here, you can't live here. We've got to find adequate housing for people where they are in their life.
I do have a follow-up.
Yes.
With saying that people won't be allowed to stay in the bus shelters, how are you going to deal with that, and who's going to be interacting with the people who are forced to live in these bus shelters? Like, are you going to policing or community organizations?
That is a good conversation that I don't have a solution to right now. I think that's going to have to be a conversation with people who are social workers, people who have expertise in the area, with a lot of the organizations and the community groups that actually work in this area, because obviously we don't want the police called. They're not the appropriate response to a social crisis in our city. And the police should be used as only a last resort when there is actual violence. So this actually has to be dealt with at the lowest possible level without confrontation, trying to find people the proper resources that they need in the community.
One of my vows in the campaign is to create a expand and rebrand the Community Services Department into a Citizens Advocacy and Education Services Department. I believe that with the Office of Civic Engagement, that both those departments could work together to facilitate addressing the needs that citizens on the streets need to fulfill their housing insecurity needs.
Okay, so with other candidates, we've asked this sort of thing, is like, we want to get to details, like exactly what would your approach be? Because encampments and the issues around people staying in bus shelters has created some us and them language, that there are legitimate bus shelter users and illegitimate bus shelter users. What is your approach that specifically where those, as you as mayor, what would you be doing in order to alleviate those friction points between people who do not want encampments near their homes, or do not want people living in bus shelters and just don't want to see it? What would your approach be?
My approach is educating citizens about what is the role of government. I believe, once again, that civics is understanding your rights, your responsibilities, your duties, and your values to a city. A lot of taxpayers don't understand that those individuals on the streets are our relatives on the streets. Our city represents them as well. If they are not being engaged in the proper steps, then I call the mayor to be the one to engage the relatives on the streets, talking to each and every one individual who are using those bus shacks.
Maybe food, shelter, water, any kind of basic services, bathrooms, those kinds of things. I think we should recognize that bus shelters are not a safe space to live. So that's, you know, most people, I think that even some of them I've talked to, they would not choose to live in a bus shelter if they didn't have to. So we need to be honest about that and how we can help. From the shelters in our city, the city does fund some of the van outreach programs, and I think we need to continue that. That's really important. Just making sure that, you know, we have you know, some organizations in the city have the opportunity or to the funds to go around and make sure that people are safe and taken care of, check up on people, you know, especially when it becomes winter. It can be, you know, obviously pretty challenging. You know, a final thing is one that I'm still working on is looking at is temporary housing, and I've seen some other cities do this. It's you know, it works when they have agreement with people who are living in tent encampments, and creating a temporary housing solution where in some cities have actually done it on the same property where they've built almost like little tiny houses. And then once the houses are there and functional, the folks can move from a tent into the house. And you know, this doesn't work in all cases, and there's lots of things to consider. But you know, we're at the point where we need to try something. We need to make action steps. And you know what? We're gonna fail sometimes. We're gonna feel like some things are just not working. But if we don't try, I also don't think that you know, we're not going to be doing the right thing to help people. So.
What I won't do is bulldoze bus shelters. What we will do is provide, if we are moving people out of where they are, and let's just focus on bus shelters for now. It's not just, you know, shoo them out of the bus shelter with no place to go, with no resources in place, with no place for support. That's not the answer. When I committed to safe injection sites, because some of the issues that we're seeing in bus shelters is the needles, it's the you know, individuals who are consumed in addiction for whatever historic reasons, acknowledging that. We can't just say, oh, well, you have to go somewhere else now. There needs to be a catch. Okay, well, where are you going to go, right? And I think that's really where my focus is, that I really, these issues demand compassion. These issues demand empathy. These issues demand understanding of what we are dealing with here. We're not dealing with people who are just in bus shelters because they're having a good time. These are crisis scenarios, and we need to take a harm reduction strategy to it. And whether it's encampments or bus shelters, you know, we're going to have to, and which we will, have a system. You know, if we're going to remove them from bus shelters, okay, what's the next step? Where are we going to go? If it's an addictions issue, great. We have safe injection sites, whether it's a mobile one or somewhere else. We have a place. We have a secondary place for them to land, not just in another corner of the street. That's not what we're trying to do here.
Thank you very much for that question. You know, my current plan is, number one, what is going to happen in fall when it gets colder? So the point is to collaborate with the non-profit organizations and provide, you know, adequate funding for 24-hour safe spaces for homeless individuals. But my long-term goal is to provide 800. I'm committed to that, and my word is my bond, right? 800 multi-faceted housing units within 4 years. Within 4 years. And then how are we going to get there? We are not going to build all 800 housing units, no. So it will consist of a low barrier housing unit. We are going to convert, you know, older buildings, you know, of lower value, and then abandoned houses, you know, into housing. We are going to change that. And I will seek the permission from the council, you know, to use city land for some of those stuff so that we can reduce our costs as well. But one thing we have to do is when I become the next mayor, we are going to evaluate, you know, abandoned houses, negotiate with the owners for better usage, you know. And let me be honest with you, you know, as a leader from my own perspective, when people see results, they will join the trend. They will say, you know what, we want to be a part of this. So we'll celebrate small wins. Then when they see that, they will start, supporting. Even some of those owners can say, you know what, we give you free of charge when they see the results. So we also get a funding from the federal, because you have to ask me, Idris, where will you get the funding for all these projects you have mentioned? So we are going to source for funding, because I know we can tap from federal rapid housing as well. We'll tap from the province, and if possible, we can do fundraising. I'm ready for this. If I become the next mayor, I can guarantee everyone this one. This one will be themes of the past, homelessness, because this is something that really triggers me to even run for mayor of Winnipeg. I'll be honest with you. It's one of the reasons, because I think we need to start thinking about the people. The same blood that flows through my brain flows through everyone's vein as well. So I'm deeply concerned about homelessness. And I said something, I went to one debate. I said, if I don't resolve homelessness in the next 4 years, don't vote for me if I try to run for another 4 years, because I am sure of what I'm saying. Yes, so that's why I mentioned that the first thing we have to do is to expand 24-hour safe spaces in 4. That will be the first thing to do, because that will be our short-term goal, because you don't want our people to have frostbite. If it has happened in the past, it should be things of the past. It should not happen again. So my plan is, any funding we have right now, we are going to spend it on that right away.
We've announced that using these tools, we want to see people that are currently occupying bus shelters and people living along the waterways within a year to 18 months, and to be given housing options. And I want to describe what that looks and feels like to me. And to me, that's having the nonprofit sector, not the police or firefighters or anything, going to them and saying, look, we've got 4 options. Here's the first 3. These are the ones we've come up with in terms of places or options where you think you might be interested in living. But we want you to know, if you don't like those first 3, let's sit down and figure out what option 4 looks like that you can help design. But you can't live here any longer after this time. But we're going to be very serious about giving you options that something is going to emerge that you're really going to like. And if that means you want to live communally, let's make that happen. You want to live with this particular group of friends, let's make that happen. All those things are on the table. But it's important for the nonprofit sector to be able to have the ability to customize, work with people that are experiencing homelessness, and to be able to work with them to customize the solutions that are going to have the impact that we all want.
First of all, COVID-19 really exacerbated addictions, problems with addictions, and individuals struggling with addiction, and individuals that are unsheltered or homeless. What I would do is to take the federal, apply for and tap into the 3rd round of the Federal Rapid Housing Initiative, build modular housing on surplus city properties, and then at least 6 surplus city properties, and then work with agencies that can provide the housing, run the housing, and then provide the wraparound supports for individuals. So they get more than shelter and housing, they get the services they need, at the time in their life that they need them. That's really critical. I think, I really believe we need to lead with compassion when we're talking about homelessness and addiction, and so this is a way to make sure that individuals have housing. One of the very good things about the Rapid Housing Initiative is this is not a promise that 5 or 6 years from now we're still saying it's a promise. The rapid housing has to be built within 12 months, right? So this is a fairly expedient and fairly fast initiative. So build the housing and get individuals into the housing.
So in the interim, even though that is fast comparatively,
Yeah.
usually things
Yeah.
move at a snail's pace. But what would you do this winter? Would you take an enforcement approach? How would you be dealing with the folks that are in the shelters? Because there has been created this very us and them feeling, right? Like bus shelters should only be for people who are riding the bus at that moment, sort of thing. So how would you address that?
Well, we ultimately do need to get our transit shelters back and make them fully available to transit users again. That's really, what their intention is. And we need to make sure that individuals that are in the transit shelters
have access to other shelter. I do know I've spoken to a couple of agencies, for example, Salvation Army. I toured there recently. They have available shelter beds right now. So again, working with agencies like Salvation Army, Main Street Project, St. Boniface Street Links, and others in partnership to make sure that individuals in our transit shelters get access to to shelters and then ultimately to housing. That's really the goal. I've committed to extend funding to West End 24/7 and to Valma's House, and I said I would also extend funding to and open work with agencies to open a third 24/7 safe space in the North End. The funding for those two, West End 24/7 and Valma's House, is set to expire at the end of next year. I said I would increase it and extend it all the way through my term as mayor.
Affordable housing, when it's available in this city, what will happen is that the literal armies of social workers that we have who are already engaging with individuals who are sleeping on the streets will be able to go to them one by one and offer them a place to live today. And my dad used to do that too, and I went with him when I was a teenager. And when he had a vacancy, what he used to do is he would drive around and he would find somebody sleeping under the bridge. And he would say, "Do you live here?" Usually they'd say yes. And he would say, "Would you like to have a place of your own? I have the keys to it right now." And sometimes they would be a little suspicious, and this is where the skills of outreach workers are very important, right? But every single time the person would say, "That seems like a good idea. What's the catch?" There's no catch. You're Canadian, you're entitled, and welfare will pay your rent, and here's the keys.
So is that what you intend